What I'm about to tell you will shock you. I was standing in the boardroom on the 47th floor of our Manhattan headquarters, looking out at the city skyline that I thought I owned. My name is Marcus Chen, and at 42 years old, I was the CEO of Tech Vision Industries, a company worth $8.5 billion. Forbes had me on their cover. Harvard wrote case studies about my success. Politicians wanted my endorsement. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now before this story continues. Because what happened next will change how you see success forever. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2023, the kind of morning where everything seemed perfect. Our stock had hit an all-time high the day before. We were about to launch our revolutionary AI-powered consumer product that was supposed to change the tech industry forever. 5 years of development, $600 million invested, and partnerships with every major retailer in North America ready to go. I had bet everything on this launch. Everything. But sitting across from me at that mahogany conference table was Sarah Mitchell, my Chief Technology Officer. She had the same look on her face that she'd had for the past 3 months, a mixture of concern and frustration. Next to her was James Rodriguez, our head of security, and Dr. Patricia Wong, our lead AI researcher. They had requested this emergency meeting for the 3rd time in as many weeks. Marcus, we need to talk about the security vulnerabilities. Sarah began, her voice steady but urgent. The penetration testing revealed critical flaws in the encryption protocols. If we launch next week, I cut her off. I actually held up my hand and stopped her mid-sentence. God, I can still see the look on her face, the disappointment, the resignation. But what I said next, no one could have predicted how much it would cost me. Sarah, we've been over this, I said, my voice dripping with the arrogance that success had bred in me. We have $50 million in pre-orders. Our distribution partners are ready. The marketing campaign has already spent $30 million as we are launching. James leaned forward, his jaw tight. Sir, with all due respect, the vulnerabilities aren't just technical glitches. We're talking about potential backdoors that could expose every single customer's personal data. Credit cards, addresses, biometric information, everything. I remember laughing. Actually laughing. That's what insurance is for, I said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Besides, what are the odds? We've got the best team in the industry. Stop being so paranoid and start being team players. Dr. Wong spoke up then, quietly but firmly. Marcus, in my 20 years of AI development, I've never seen risks like these ignored. The neural network has shown unpredictable behavior patterns in 7% of test cases. That might not sound like much, but with projected sales of 5 million units in the first year, we're talking about 350,000 potentially malfunctioning devices. Potentially, I emphasized, pointing at her. That's the key word, potentially. You know what's not potential? The $200 million in revenue we'll lose if we delay. The competitors breathing down our necks. The investors who will crucify us for missing our window. 3 warning signs that everyone saw but me. First, our quality assurance team had flagged a 15% failure rate in stress testing, 3 times higher than industry standards. Second, 2 of our senior engineers had quietly resigned the week before, citing ethical concerns in their exit interviews. Third, and this one still haunts me, my own daughter had asked me at dinner one night, Dad, is your new product safe? She was only 12, but even she had heard the rumors circulating in tech circles. I ignored them all, every single one. Sarah tried one more time. Marcus, I'm formally recommending we delay the launch by 60 days. Just 60 days to fix these issues properly. I'll put it in writing, I'm begging you. I looked at her, this brilliant woman who had helped build Tech Vision from a startup in my garage to a multi-billion-dollar empire, and I said the words that would destroy everything. If you're not willing to take risks, maybe you're not the right person for this company anymore. The room went silent, completely silent. James and Patricia looked at Sarah with sympathy. Sarah looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before, pity. She nodded slowly, gathered her papers, and walked out. James and Patricia followed. I stood there in that boardroom, surrounded by awards and accolades, and I felt triumphant. I had made the tough call. I had shown leadership. I had refused to let fear dictate our strategy. But I had no idea that in exactly 11 days my entire world would collapse in the most spectacular way possible. That afternoon, I called our PR team and moved the launch date up by 2 days. Strike while the iron's hot, I told them. I appeared on CNBC that evening, confident and charismatic, promising investors that TechVision was about to revolutionize how humans interact with technology. The host asked me about rumors of internal concerns. I smiled and called them growing pains of innovation. My wife, Jennifer, watched the interview from home. She called me afterward. "Marcus, are you sure about this?" she asked. "You seem different lately, more aggressive, less cautious." "That's because I'm closing the biggest deal of our lives," I told her. "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." But the truth was, I had stopped listening to everyone who cared about me. Success had made me deaf to wisdom, blind to danger, and absolutely convinced of my own infallibility. I had built something extraordinary, and I believed that made me extraordinary. Untouchable, invincible. The night before the launch, I couldn't sleep, but I told myself it was excitement, not anxiety. I paced our penthouse apartment looking at the city lights, imagining the headlines. TechVision's revolutionary AI device breaks sales records. Marcus Chen, the visionary who changed everything. How TechVision dominated the future. At 3:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from Sarah. The subject line read, "For the record." The body contained a single sentence. "I warned you, Marcus. I hope you can live with what comes next." I deleted it without responding. Launch day arrived. April 3rd, 2023. A date burned into my memory forever. We held a massive event at the Javits Center. 3,000 people attended, live streaming to millions worldwide. Celebrities, tech journalists, industry leaders, everyone who was anyone wanted to see TechVision's latest miracle. I gave the presentation of my life. 45 minutes of pure showmanship. The crowd went wild. Our stock jumped 12% before the market even closed. By 4 p.m., we had processed $180 million in orders. By 6 p.m., that number had climbed to $340 million. I was on top of the world, literally and figuratively. The victory celebration that night was legendary. Champagne flowing. Everyone congratulating me. Board members shaking my hand. And then at 11:37 p.m., I received the call that would change everything. The moment that destroyed everything happened at 11:37 p.m. I was still at the celebration, third glass of champagne in hand, when my phone started vibrating non-stop. Not just one call. 5, 10, 20 missed calls in less than 2 minutes. All from James Rodriguez, our head of security. My stomach dropped even through the champagne haze. I stepped out onto the balcony of the venue, the cold April night air hitting my face like a slap. I called James back. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus, we've been breached." His voice was shaking. I had never heard James sound scared before. "It's catastrophic. The hackers got in through exactly the vulnerability we warned you about. They've accessed the entire customer database, every single person who pre-ordered or bought today." The champagne glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the balcony floor. "How bad?" I managed to whisper. 4.7 million customer records, full names, addresses, credit card information, social security numbers, biometric data from the setup process. Everything. He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily. "And Marcus, they're not just stealing the data. They're selling it on the dark web. Right now. Live auction. We're watching it happen and we can't stop it." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the balcony railing so hard my knuckles turned white. How is this possible? We have firewalls, encryption, multiple security layers, all bypassed because of the backdoor vulnerability that Sarah identified 3 months ago, the one you refused to fix, the one you called paranoid concern. James's voice wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was defeated. "I'm submitting my resignation effective immediately. I can't be part of what happens next." He hung up. Just like that. I stood there on that balcony, the sounds of celebration echoing behind me, and felt my entire world beginning to crumble. But this was only the beginning. What happened over the next 48 hours would make this moment seem like a minor inconvenience. I immediately called an emergency board meeting for midnight. By 12:30 a.m., 15 board members were video conferencing from around the world, all in various states of shock and anger. Our chief legal officer, Margaret Stevens, delivered the preliminary assessment. We're looking at the largest data breach in tech history, potentially $2 billion in liability. Class action lawsuits are probably already being filed as we speak. $2 billion? I repeated, my voice hollow. But we have insurance? Insurance caps at $500 million for cyber incidents, Margaret interrupted. And that's if they even pay out, which they won't if they can prove negligence. Which they can, easily. Sarah's written warnings are time-stamped and documented. Your dismissal of safety protocols is on record. The majority of people who watch forget to subscribe or don't be one more. Subscribe now and see how this disaster unfolds. Board member Richard Ashford, a venture capitalist who had been with us since the beginning, spoke up. Marcus, I'm going to ask you directly. Did your senior team warn you about these security risks before launch? The room went silent. 15 faces on screens staring at me, waiting. I could have lied. I could have deflected. But the paper trail was there. The emails, the meeting notes, the formal recommendations. Yes, I said quietly. They warned me. And you proceeded anyway? I thought they were being overly cautious. I thought the opportunity cost of delay was greater than the risk. You thought wrong. Richard cut me off. And now we're all going to pay for your arrogance. At 2:15 a.m., our stock began plummeting in after-hours trading. By 6 a.m., when markets opened in Asia, we had lost 40% of our value. By 9:30 a.m., when New York opened, we were down 67%. $5.8 billion in market capitalization. Gone. Just like that. But the financial losses were only part of the nightmare. At 7 a.m., the first lawsuit was filed. By noon, there were 47. By the end of the week, over 200 class action lawsuits, representing millions of customers. The FBI opened a criminal investigation. The FTC launched a probe. Congress called for hearings. Every news channel was running my picture with headlines like Tech Titan's Massive Failure and The Man Who Ignored Every Warning. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Angry customers, furious partners, reporters demanding statements. I had to change my number 3 times in one day. Jennifer took our kids and went to her mother's house. Not because I'm leaving you, she said, tears streaming down her face, but because there are protesters outside our building. Actual protesters with signs calling you a criminal. I need to keep the kids safe. On day 3 after launch, retailers started pulling our product from shelves. Amazon suspended sales. Best Buy, Target, Walmart, all of them issued statements distancing themselves from TechVision. The $600 million we had spent on development, worthless. The $50 million in pre-orders, being refunded. The $30 million marketing campaign, promoting a product that was now radioactive. And then I received the email that made me realize I had lost everything. It was from Sarah Mitchell. The subject line read, "I told you so, but that doesn't make me happy." The email said, "Marcus, I'm not writing this to gloat. I'm writing because I genuinely hope you learned something from this catastrophe. You didn't just ignore technical warnings, you ignored basic human wisdom. You stopped listening to people who cared about the company, about our customers, about you. Success made you believe you were infallible, and that belief destroyed everything we built together. I hope someday you understand that the biggest risk wasn't the security vulnerability. It was your ego. Take care of yourself. You're going to need it for what's coming." I read that email 17 times. Each time the words cut deeper. By the end of week 1, our board held a vote of no confidence. Unanimous, 15-0. Even the members who had been my friends, my allies, my supporters, they all voted against me. I was asked to resign as CEO effective immediately. If I refused, they would terminate me for cause, which would void my severance package and stock options. I resigned. 20 years of building TechVision from nothing, gone in a signature. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. The personal lawsuits started coming. Shareholders suing me personally for negligence. Customers suing for emotional distress. Partners suing for breach of contract. My personal assets were frozen pending litigation. My legal fees were running $50,000 per day. Per day. The house in the Hamptons, sold to pay lawyers. The art collection Jennifer and I had spent years curating, liquidated. The trust funds we had set up for our kids' education, seized as part of the asset freeze. Everything we had built, everything we had saved, everything we had planned for our future, all of it disappearing to cover the consequences of my decisions. On day 12, I was sitting alone in our penthouse, which the bank had informed me would be foreclosed on in 60 days. When Jennifer came home, she had been gone for 9 days. She looked exhausted, older somehow, as if the stress had aged her years in just over a week. "Marcus," she said, sitting across from me at our dining table, "I need you to be honest with me. Did you really think you knew better than everyone? Better than Sarah, who had been right about every major technical decision for 10 years? Better than James, who had kept us secure through everything? Better than Patricia, who literally wrote the textbook on AI safety?" I couldn't answer. I just sat there, this broken shell of the man who had stood in that boardroom 11 days ago, so confident, so sure, so utterly wrong about everything. "Your silence tells me everything," Jennifer continued. "You did. You actually believed you were smarter than all of them combined." She paused, wiping away tears. "The Marcus I married would have never been so arrogant. Success changed you. It made you cruel. It made you deaf. And now it's made you broke. What happened next would test everything I thought I knew about myself." The morning after Jennifer's devastating truth, I woke up on the couch in our living room, our massive, soon-to-be foreclosed penthouse living room, with the worst headache of my life. Not from alcohol, from reality, from the crushing weight of understanding what I had done. My phone had 247 unread messages. I scrolled through them with numb fingers. Angry messages from employees who had lost their jobs when TechVision laid off 60% of the workforce. Threatening messages from customers whose identities had been stolen. Cold, formal messages from lawyers representing various parties suing me. And one message that made me stop scrolling entirely. It was from my father, Daniel Chen. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. My choice, not his. I had been too busy being successful to maintain relationships that didn't serve my ambitions. The message was simple. "Son, I know you're going through hell. But remember, I built 3 businesses and lost them all before I finally learned. The question isn't whether you fall. It's whether you learn why you fell. Call me when you're ready to listen." I stared at that message for 20 minutes. My father, the man I had dismissed as old-fashioned and not ambitious enough, had tried to warn me too. 6 months ago, at a family dinner I had barely attended, he had said, "Marcus, when you stop listening to people who disagree with you, you stop growing." I had smiled politely and changed the subject to my latest acquisition. "And you? Have you ever been so convinced you were right that you couldn't hear the truth?" That's what had happened to me. Success had built walls around my ego so thick that no warning could penetrate them. At 9 a.m., I had to attend a deposition for one of the lawsuits. My lawyer, Gerald Hoffman, one of the few who hadn't dropped me yet, met me in the lobby of the law firm. "Marcus, I need to prepare you. They're going to ask about the warnings you received, about the meetings, about Sarah's recommendations. You need to be honest, but strategic." "Strategic," I repeated bitterly. "Is that what we call lying now?" Gerald grabbed my arm. "It's not lying. It's protecting what little you have left. Your family, your future, your freedom. Because yes, there's a possibility of criminal charges if they can prove willful negligence." The deposition lasted 7 hours. 7 hours of reliving every mistake, every ignored warning, every arrogant decision. The opposing attorney, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Park, was relentless. "Mr. Chen, when Ms. Mitchell formally recommended delaying the launch, what was your response?" I disagreed with her. "Assessment. Did you review the technical report she provided?" Silence. Because I hadn't. I had trusted my gut over her expertise. "Mr. Chen, please answer the question." I skimmed them." You skimmed a 200-page technical security analysis before making a decision that affected millions of customers?" I trusted my instincts. I had built a successful company and destroyed it in 11 days. Elizabeth interrupted. "Let's move on. Did you threaten Ms. Mitchell's employment?" When she persisted in her concerns. But what I had to admit next, even I couldn't believe I had said it. I told her that if she wasn't willing to take risks, maybe she wasn't the right person for the company. "You threatened to fire your CTO for doing her job?" "I didn't threaten," I started, but Gerald put his hand on my arm. "Stop talking," his eyes said. Elizabeth leaned forward. Mr. Chen, in your testimony, you've admitted to ignoring formal recommendations, dismissing expert analysis, and threatening personnel who raised safety concerns. Would you say these actions constitute a pattern of negligent leadership? The room spun. Because she was right. Completely right. It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a pattern. Months of dismissing concerns, silencing dissent, prioritizing speed over safety, ego over expertise. My voice cracked. I made mistakes. Mistakes that cost millions of people their security and privacy. Mistakes that cost thousands of employees their jobs. Mistakes that cost shareholders billions of dollars. She paused. These aren't mistakes, Mr. Chen. This is negligence. When the deposition finally ended, I sat in Gerald's office, completely depleted. How bad is it? I asked. Gerald didn't sugarcoat it. Bad. Very bad. Your own testimony just gave them everything they need to prove willful negligence. We might be able to settle some of the civil suits, but it's going to cost you everything you have. And the criminal investigation? Marcus, there's a real possibility you could face jail time. Jail time. The words echoed in my mind as I took a taxi home. I had to sell my cars to pay legal fees. The driver recognized me from the news. I saw him looking at me in the rearview mirror. You're that CEO, right? The one who screwed over millions of people? I didn't answer. What could I say? For those wanting more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened when I got home was even worse. Jennifer was there, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her. She looked up when I walked in. Her eyes were red from crying. Divorce papers? I asked, seeing the legal documents. No, she said quietly. Financial statements. Marcus, we're broke. Completely broke. The legal fees, the asset freezes, the judgments against you. We have $47,000 left. That's it. 20 years of building wealth, and we have less than we started with when we got married. I sank into a chair. The kids' college funds? Gone. Seized. The retirement accounts? Liquidated to pay settlements. The life insurance policies? Canceled. We can't afford the premiums. I put my head in my hands. I'm so sorry, Jen. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't pay for our daughter's braces. Sorry doesn't pay for our son's asthma medication. Sorry doesn't put food on the table. Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was resigned, tired. I've been offered a job, Marcus. Teaching position in Seattle. It pays $65,000 a year. Enough for me and the kids to live modestly. My head snapped up. Seattle? That's across the country. I know. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. But I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. I can't let the kids watch you destroy yourself. You need to figure out who you are without the money, without the title, without the success. And we need stability while you do that. You're leaving me. I'm surviving, Marcus. There's a difference. I still love you. I probably always will, but I can't drown with you. The kids can't drown with you. She stood up, gathering the papers. I'm leaving on Friday. You can visit whenever you want. But you need to fix yourself first. You need to understand what you did and why you did it. You need to become the man I married again. She left the room, and I heard her on the phone in the bedroom, probably finalizing arrangements with her sister in Seattle. I sat there in that kitchen, in that penthouse that would soon belong to the bank, and finally, let myself feel the full weight of what I had done. I hadn't just lost money. I had lost trust, respect, relationships, my family, my reputation, everything that actually mattered. And for what? To launch a product 2 months earlier? To hit an arbitrary deadline? To prove I was the smartest person in the room? And then something inside me broke completely. Not my spirit, my ego. That armor of invincibility that had protected me from doubt, from criticism, from wisdom. It shattered, and underneath it I found someone I barely recognized. A man who had become so obsessed with success that he had forgotten what success was actually for. That night I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I called my father. Dad, I said when he answered, I'm ready to listen. The next 6 months were the darkest period of my life, but they were also the most transformative. After Jennifer and the kids moved to Seattle, I had to leave the penthouse. Couldn't afford it anymore. The bank took it, along with most of our possessions. I moved into a studio apartment in Queens, $200 a month. which was about all I could manage while drowning in legal fees. My father came to visit me 2 days after I called him. He stood in the doorway of my tiny studio, taking in the air mattress on the floor, the cardboard boxes serving as furniture, the single window overlooking a parking lot. No judgment on his face, just sadness. "When I lost my second business," he said, sitting on one of the boxes, "I thought my life was over. I was 52 years old, bankrupt, with your mother and you kids depending on me. I spent 3 months feeling sorry for myself." He looked at me directly. "Don't waste 3 months, son. Start learning now." "Learning what?" I asked bitterly. "How to be a failure? Learning humility. Learning to listen. Learning that being smart isn't the same as being wise." He pulled out a worn notebook from his jacket. "I want you to do something for me. Every day, I want you to write down 3 things. 1 lesson you learned from your failure, 1 person you hurt with your arrogance, and 1 action you can take to become better." I looked at the notebook like it was a foreign object. "A journal? Dad, I'm facing criminal charges. I have lawyers to meet with, depositions to prepare for, and all of that will go better if you actually understand what you did wrong." He pressed the notebook into my hands. "Your problem wasn't the security flaw, Marcus. It was that you stopped being teachable. Success made you unteachable. This is how you learn to learn again." But what happened when I actually started writing? That's when things got real. That first night, I stared at the blank page for an hour before I could write anything. Finally, I wrote, "Lesson learned. I confuse confidence with infallibility. Person I hurt, Sarah Mitchell, who dedicated 10 years to Tech Vision. Action to take. Apologize to Sarah. Actually apologize." The next day, I did something that terrified me more than any deposition. I sent an email to Sarah Mitchell. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. Directly. "Sarah, I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to respond. But I need to say this. You were right about everything. The security, risks, the need for caution, the importance of taking time to do things properly. I was so convinced that I knew better that I couldn't hear you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I understand now, too late, that my arrogance destroyed everything you helped build. I'm sorry. I didn't hear back. I didn't expect to. But writing it, sending it, acknowledging what I had done, it was a start. The legal battles continued. By month 3, we had settled several of the civil suits. The settlements totaled $873 million. Since I didn't have anywhere near that amount, the court structured payment plans that would take decades to fulfill. Decades of wage garnishment, asset surrender, financial restriction. I would probably die still paying for those 11 days in April 2023. The criminal investigation was more frightening. The federal prosecutor, a tenacious man named Robert Chang, was building a case for criminal negligence and fraud. If convicted, I could face up to 15 years in prison. My new lawyer, I couldn't afford Gerald anymore, was trying to negotiate a plea deal. "They're offering 3 years, she told me. "You'd be out in 18 months, with good behavior. 3 years in federal prison, for ignoring warnings, for being arrogant, for thinking I knew better than everyone else." But something strange was happening to me during all of this. As everything external was stripped away, the money, the prestige, the family, the freedom potentially, something internal was growing. Clarity, understanding, humility. I started actually reading the technical reports that Sarah had sent me, all 200 pages, and I realized something devastating. I hadn't ignored her warnings because I didn't understand them. I had ignored them because I did understand them, and they threatened what I wanted. The warnings were inconvenient to my timeline, my vision, my ego, so I had simply decided they didn't matter. That realization hit me like a truck. I had been willfully blind, intentionally deaf, purposefully ignorant, not because I couldn't see the truth, but because I chose not to. In month 4, something unexpected happened. I received a visitor at my studio apartment, James Rodriguez, the former head of security who had resigned the night of the breach. I opened the door and there he stood, looking uncomfortable. "I'm not here to make you feel better," he said immediately. "I'm here because I made a promise to myself to tell you something face to face." "Okay," I said, bracing myself. "You didn't just ignore the warnings, Marcus. You made us complicit in your negligence. Every time we raised concerns and you dismissed them, you forced us to choose. Do our jobs properly or keep our jobs at all? You put us in an impossible position. Sarah, Patricia, me, we all knew this disaster was coming, and you made it happen by turning safety into a career-threatening issue. His words cut deep because they were true. You're right, I said quietly. I weaponized your employment against your expertise. I made you afraid to do your jobs properly. James looked surprised, like he had expected me to argue. Yeah, you did. He paused. But I also came to tell you something else. I'm working with the prosecutor. I'm testifying against you. My stomach dropped. I understand. Do you? Do you understand that my testimony will probably send you to prison? Yes. And I did. I finally did. You're doing the right thing, James. Someone has to hold people like me accountable. Someone has to say that leaders can't just ignore safety, dismiss concerns, and threaten people into silence. If my prison sentence prevents one other CEO from doing what I did, then maybe something good comes from this disaster. James stared at me for a long moment. You've changed. I've been broken, I corrected. Sometimes that's what it takes. After he left, I added to my journal, lesson learned. Leadership without humility is tyranny. Person I hurt, James Rodriguez, who tried to protect our customers. Action to take. Accept the consequences without fighting the truth. Most people who watch forget to subscribe. Don't be another one. Subscribe now and see how this story ends. By month 5, the plea deal was finalized. 3 years in federal prison for criminal negligence. I would serve at least 18 months. When my lawyer told me, I felt relief. Not happiness, but relief. The ambiguity was over. I knew what I had done. I knew what it cost. And I knew what I had to pay. The night before I was scheduled to turn myself in, Jennifer called. It was the first time we had spoken in 2 months. The kids want to say goodbye, she said. Can we video chat? I saw their faces on the screen. My daughter Emily, 13 now, and my son David, 10. And I broke down. Actually broke down crying on camera in front of my children. I'm so sorry, I told them. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I'm sorry I let success make me into someone cruel and arrogant. I'm sorry you have to tell your friends that your dad is in prison. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. Dad, our therapist says you made bad choices, but that doesn't make you a bad person. She says the bravest thing you can do now is own up to what you did and try to be better. Your therapist is very wise, I said, trying to smile. Through tears, David, always the practical one, asked, Dad, when you get out, will you be different? Will you be like you used to be? Before you got mean? That question destroyed me and rebuilt me at the same time. Yes, I promised. I will be different. I will listen. I will be humble. I will remember that being successful doesn't mean being right. I promise you both. Jennifer's face appeared on screen. Marcus, I want you to know something. I still love you. The kids still love you. When you get out, we'll figure out what our family looks like. But you need to use this time to really understand what went wrong. Not just with the company, with you. I will, I promised. I already am. That night, I wrote my final journal entry before prison. Lesson learned. The worst warnings we ignore are the ones we hear inside our own conscience. Person I hurt. Everyone who trusted me. My family. My team. My customers. My investors. Action to take. Spend every day of the next 18 months becoming someone worthy of a second chance. The next morning I turned myself in to federal authorities. As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists and I was led away to begin my sentence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not shame, though there was plenty of that. Not regret, though that was overwhelming. What I felt was hope, because I was finally being held accountable, finally facing the truth, finally learning the lessons I should have learned when people tried to warn me. But the biggest lesson was still to come, and it would come from the most unexpected source. Prison changes you in ways you can't imagine until you're there. Federal prison isn't like the movies. It's boring, institutional, and filled with time. So much time. Time to think. Time to reflect. Time to truly understand what you've done. My cellmate was a guy named Marcus. Same name, different story. He had been a prosecutor who had taken bribes to throw cases. We both betrayed trust, he said to me on my first night, just in different ways. I spent my days working in the prison library, helping other inmates with legal documents and appeals. At night, I read everything I could get my hands on. Books on leadership, ethics, decision-making, humility. I was finally doing what I should have done years ago, learning from people who knew better than me. 4 months into my sentence, I received a letter. The return address made my hands shake. Sarah Mitchell. I opened it carefully, afraid of what it might say. But what I read made me cry for the third time since this nightmare began. Marcus, I received your email 6 months ago. I didn't respond because I was too angry. But I've had time to process everything, and I need you to know something. I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. Not because the consequences weren't devastating. They were. But because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. I've moved on. I'm CTO at a startup that values safety over speed. I'm happy. I hope you find your way to happiness too, but a different kind than before. The kind that comes from doing things right, not just doing things successfully. Good luck, Marcus. I read that letter 17 times. Sarah had forgiven me. Not forgotten, not excused, but forgiven. And somehow, that forgiveness hurt more than any punishment, because it showed me the grace I hadn't shown others. 2 weeks later, another letter. This one from James Rodriguez. I testified against you because it was the right thing to do. But I also need you to know that I hope prison teaches you what success couldn't. You had the potential to be great, Marcus. Not successful. You already were successful. But great. Maybe you still do. Then letters started arriving from former employees, some angry, some sad, some surprisingly supportive, from customers whose data was stolen, some of them sharing how they had rebuilt their credit and their lives, from investors who had lost millions but who wrote things like, I learned to diversify because of you, or I'll never blindly trust a CEO again. Thank you for that lesson, even if it was expensive. And then the letter that changed everything arrived. It was from Dr. Patricia Wong, our former lead AI researcher. She wrote, Marcus, I'm writing to tell you about something I discovered after TechVision collapsed. I've been analyzing the AI system we built, the one you rushed to market. I found something in the code that I think you should know. The vulnerabilities Sarah warned about? They weren't just security flaws. They were fundamental design problems that would have caused the AI to malfunction catastrophically after 6 to 8 months of use. Not just privacy breaches, actual physical danger to users. The system was designed to control smart home devices, remember? Locks, thermostats, security systems. If you hadn't launched when you did, if the breach hadn't happened, we would have had hundreds of thousands of malfunctioning AI systems in people's homes controlling their security. The breach probably saved lives, Marcus. Your failure prevented a much worse disaster. I sat on my prison bunk reading those words over and over. The breach that destroyed everything had actually prevented something worse. The ignoring of warnings that sent me to prison had inadvertently exposed problems that could have hurt or killed people. It didn't make what I did right, but it gave it meaning. I wrote back to Patricia immediately. Thank you for telling me this. It doesn't absolve me of ignoring the warnings, but it helps me understand that even our worst mistakes can serve a purpose. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other leaders don't make the same mistakes I did. If you've made it this far, you're special. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, turn on notifications, and share with 3 people who need to hear this story. Because what happened next shows that even the worst failures can lead to the most important transformations. On month 14 of my sentence, I was called to the warden's office. Sitting there was a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Park, a venture capitalist. Mr. Chen, I've been following your story. I've read about your case, your guilty plea, your acceptance of responsibility. I have a proposition for you. He pulled out a folder. When you're released in 4 months, I want to hire you. I almost laughed. Hire me? To do what? I'm a convicted felon. I destroyed an $8 billion company. I'm toxic. Exactly, David said. You're the perfect person to teach other CEOs what not to do. I want you to create a consulting firm that helps leaders identify when their ego is overriding their judgment. I want you to train executives to listen to warnings. I want you to be the cautionary tale that prevents the next TechVision. I stared at him. You want me to make a business out of my failure? I want you to make a purpose out of your lesson." He leaned forward. "Marcus, hundreds of companies are heading toward the same cliff you drove off. They have leaders who are successful, confident, and completely deaf to the warnings around them. You can save them, not because you succeeded, but because you failed. Spectacularly, publicly, and most importantly, you learned from it." "I don't have any money," I said. "I'm paying settlements for the next 30 years. I'll provide startup capital in exchange for equity in the consulting firm. But there's one condition. You have to be completely honest about your failure. No spinning it, no softening it. Raw, brutal truth about how arrogance destroys everything. The biggest lesson I learned? Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." I accepted David's offer. When I was released from prison in August 2024, I immediately started Second Warning Consulting, helping CEOs and executives recognize when they're ignoring critical warnings. My first client was a biotech CEO who was rushing an untested drug to market despite safety concerns from her team. I showed her the TechVision case study. I showed her my prison intake photo. I showed her letters from customers whose lives were destroyed by my data breach. And I asked her, "Is your timeline worth this?" She delayed the launch, ran additional tests, found a potentially fatal side effect, fixed it, launched safely 8 months later, saved lives, saved her company, saved herself from becoming me. That's what I do now. I'm not rich anymore. 60% of my income goes to settlements and restitution. I live modestly in a small apartment in Brooklyn, but I'm doing something that matters, something that uses my failure to prevent others from failing. Jennifer and I are separated, but we're friendly. The kids visit once a month. Emily wants to be a software engineer, but ethical, Dad, not like you were. David tells everyone his father made mistakes but fixed them. It's more than I deserve. Last month, I was invited to speak at Harvard Business School, the same school that had written case studies about my success. This time, I was the case study on failure. I stood in front of 200 MBA students and told them everything, every ignored warning, every arrogant decision, every consequence. At the end, a student raised her hand. "Mr. Chen, if you could go back to that boardroom in March 2023, what would you say to yourself?" I thought about it carefully. I would say, "Marcus, you're not as smart as you think you are. You're not as right as you feel. And the people trying to warn you, they're not trying to stop you. They're trying to save you. Listen to them, before it cost you everything." The room was silent. Then, slowly, they started clapping. Not because my story had a happy ending. It didn't, not really. But because it had truth. Raw, painful, transformative truth. So here's my final message to anyone watching this. Success will lie to you. It will tell you that you're invincible, that you know best, that warnings are for weak people. Don't believe it. The moment you stop listening to people who care enough to warn you is the moment you start losing everything that matters. I lost $8.5 billion in company value. I lost my freedom for 18 months. I lost my marriage, my reputation, my pride, but I gained something infinitely more valuable. Wisdom. The wisdom to know that being right isn't as important as being good, that being successful isn't as important as being responsible, that being powerful isn't as important as being humble. The CEO who ignored the warnings paid with a $1 billion loss, but he gained a priceless lesson. The smartest people aren't those who never fail. They're those who learn from failure and spend the rest. The smartest people aren't those who never fail. They're those who learn from failure and spend the rest of their lives making sure others don't have to suffer the same way. 3 weeks ago, I received an invitation that brought everything full circle. TechVision, or what was left of it after being sold off in pieces, had been acquired by a consortium of investors. They were rebuilding it from scratch with a new mission, technology with accountability, and they wanted me to speak at their launch event, not as CEO, not as a success story, but as a reminder of what happens when ambition overshadows ethics. I stood on that stage in the same Javits Center where I had launched the product that destroyed everything. But this time, I spoke different words. 2 years ago, I stood on this stage and promised to change the world. I did change it, just not the way I intended. I changed it by showing what happens when leaders stop being teachable, when success becomes more important than safety, when ego drowns out wisdom. In the audience, I saw faces I recognized. Sarah Mitchell was there. She had been brought on as Chief Ethics Officer for the new Tech Vision. James Rodriguez was the head of security again. Dr. Patricia Wong was leading the AI safety division. They had all come back, not because the company was the same, but because it had learned from its catastrophic failure. After my speech, Sarah approached me. We hadn't spoken face to face since that day in the boardroom when I had threatened her job. "That took courage," she said, extending her hand. "Speaking the truth about your failure." I shook her hand, feeling the weight of everything between us. It took prison, bankruptcy, and losing everything I cared about. But yes, eventually I found courage. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Do you ever wish you had listened to us back then? That you could go back and make different choices?" I thought about it carefully, every single day. But I also know that if I could go back, I'd probably make the same mistakes, because the person I was then couldn't hear warnings. He had to lose everything to learn how to listen. That's the tragedy of ego. It makes you deaf until failure makes you humble. Sarah nodded slowly. Then maybe your real gift to the world isn't the companies you build or the products you create. Maybe it's being living proof that failure can be the greatest teacher. "If that's my legacy," I said quietly, "then maybe everything that happened had a purpose after all." Today, I'm 44 years old. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment. I take the subway to work. I have $200 in my bank account, more than I've had in 2 years. My children are learning to respect me again, slowly. My father and I have dinner every Sunday. My marriage is over, but Jennifer and I are becoming friends again. I'm not successful anymore. Not by the standards I used to measure success, but I'm doing something far more important. I'm helping other people avoid becoming who I was. Last week, a CEO called me at midnight. He was about to launch a product despite safety warnings from his team. "I know I should delay," he said, his voice shaking. "But I'm so afraid of failing, afraid of missing the opportunity, afraid of looking weak." I told him exactly what I wish someone had told me. "You know what's weaker than delaying a launch? Ignoring warnings and destroying everything. You know what's more frightening than missing an opportunity? Creating a catastrophe. You know what's more painful than looking cautious? Being reckless and watching people suffer because of it." He delayed his launch, fixed the problems, released it safely 3 months later. His board questioned his caution. His investors pressured him to move faster, but he held firm, because he understood what I had to learn the hard way. Real strength isn't pushing through warnings. It's having the courage to stop and listen. That's my mission now. That's what I wake up for every morning. Not to rebuild my fortune. That's gone forever. And honestly, I don't miss it as much as I thought I would. Not to restore my reputation. Some stains are permanent, and they should be. But to use my spectacular failure to help others succeed by avoiding my mistakes. If you've made it all the way to the end of this story, you're truly special. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, turn on the notification bell, and share this with 3 people who need to hear it. Because somewhere out there is a leader standing in a boardroom, ignoring warnings, convinced they know better than everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, my story will reach them before they make the same catastrophic mistakes I did. The final truth I learned after losing everything? Success doesn't make you invincible. It makes you vulnerable. The higher you climb, the more important it becomes to listen to the people trying to keep you from falling. And if you do fall, the only way back up is through absolute honesty about how you fell and why. I destroyed an $8.5 billion company. I went to prison. I lost my family, my fortune, my freedom. But I gained something that no amount of success could have taught me: humility. And in the end, humility is worth more than all the billions I lost. Because humility keeps you human. Humility keeps you listening. Humility keeps you from becoming the kind of person who ignores every warning until it's too late. My name is Marcus Chen. I was the CEO who ignored the warnings and paid with a $1 billion loss. But more importantly, I'm now the man who learned from that loss and spends every day making sure others don't have to pay the same price. That's not redemption. That's responsibility. And it's the most valuable thing I've ever owned. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you never have to live it yourself.